about georeferencing exported graphics. Under the Tools menu of XPSWM, you'll find an option to export graphics. The Export Graphics dialog is shown here in this PowerPoint slide, and one of the things that was changed is that there's this last option called World File Format. But what this enhancement has done is when you export, for example, the JPEG, GIF, bitmap, etc., when you make these exports of the plan view window, then it will automatically be creating now a world file that goes with them. But of course, we made this other option as well where you could just directly write the world file. And the world file is a small text file that basically has just a few lines in it. I'm kind of showing you a little snippet of this world file. It gives the starting corner and then some distance for each pixel and some rotation information as well. Then when you load this into XPSWM as one example, so if you export, for example, a JPEG and then you import it and a world file is present, it automatically creates the destination rectangle. Essentially, the graphic is georeferenced because of the world file contents, and it will compute the top, left, bottom, and right corners and then stretch and move the picture to where it should go. You could, of course, manually change that by making edits to top, left, bottom, and right, but what we're offering is when we export from XPSWM, the georeferencing is there if you take the graphic to XPSWM models or some other program. The georeferenced world file then, for example, here's a screen capture of me having exported the graphics where I've turned off everything else. All these other things are unticked. And I've turned on the graphics so it looks like I'm looking at my XPSWM flood model result. It's just a graphic that's georeferenced, and you can tell perhaps by the status bar that we're picking up the correct X and Y. The second item that I've grouped here, and then I will start showing you live in the software, is about the 2D color-coded diagnostics. When you do a 2D model, the errors and warnings and so on, these types of messages are a specific layer to the 2D model. And since the 2D model errors and warnings are, if you will, spatial, they have a spatial representation. In the past, they've all been one color, and they have all been able to be shown or not shown, but not individually pick, for example, the checked messages or the error messages or the unstable messages as examples. So now when you right-click and go to the properties of the diagnostics layer and you click on the data tab, you can choose to show them all. This was existing, but now you can turn on or off specific messages that you would like to see, and they each have their own color. Now I'll go to the software and demo the last few items that I've talked about. So let me switch over to my XPSWM 2016. So the tool that I talked about first was under the Tools menu. We've got the ability to export graphics, and this export graphics is essentially going to export to a graphics file everything in the plan view window, right? Everything in this model space here. And as an example, I could say choose a bitmap file. Well, in fact, let me prepare the screen for a better export, like maybe one that included the max water depth. So with the max water depth being displayed, I can go and I could export the graphics and choose a bitmap and export that. I've already done it just a few minutes ago. So you see I could choose save and it will create this export.bitmap file. And let me turn off, for example, everything just to make it more apparent. I'll turn off all of the 1D network and the 2D model. I'll turn off everything as well and the topography. perhaps the messages as well, the diagnostic messages. Now if I load the graphic that I've just exported as a background image, I can choose this bitmap and I can open that. It automatically filled in top, left, bottom, right because of the presence of the world file. So for example, there will be accompanied with the bitmap export BPW. There's the world file that I had mentioned, and click the OK button and you can see, for example, the bitmap image, which of course I could toggle on or off. But I'm just using XPSWM to show you about the georeferenced image export, but of course normally your target would be perhaps Civil 3D or GIS or maybe some other presentation software where you'll take an export of the image. And of course it lines up correctly, so if I was to toggle on maybe the links and nodes, they'll line up with the image. Let me turn this off and go back to the model typically. Maybe I can just revert to the previously saved version since it had all the layers that I wanted being displayed. And I'll discuss with you about the errors and warnings, the messages essentially from a 2D simulation. So from a 2D simulation, there's this diagnostics layer, which loads a map info file generated by the analysis engine. And if I go to its properties, I've got the ability to see how many messages there are. There happens to be 52 of them, but it's only displaying the first 5. If I click on the diagnostics display, select it all, and click OK, it's going to show me all of these messages. Perhaps that might be a little bit of overkill. There's quite a few. And maybe you only have a concern about things, for example, like warnings or check messages. So this is where this ability to go in and filter, perhaps no other or unstable messages, will just leave it to the warning messages and the check messages, which I believe is the bulk of them, so perhaps it won't be a big change. And if I go in and say, well, how about just the warning messages, then it's only going to be the warning messages. You may notice that the yellow is a little bit hard to see on a white background. You know, if you display the background image, then it's quite easy to see the yellow. Yellow on the white might be a little difficult, but there's no reason why you couldn't, for example, just load a background image that would be, say, a light gray background. And hence the way that things are drawn, the messages are above the background image, so they'd be drawn on top of it. It's not going to be like they're hidden from the background image. So this is a big enhancement, especially in the larger of 2D models where there might be a lot of messages. We've seen situations where people have had like 3 error messages, and they've had difficulty finding the 3 error messages amongst the hundreds of other messages. You do have, of course, the ability to just go to a certain location in the software. You know, you could go to an XY location knowing the XY location of the message, which could have been found perhaps by simply looking at the text file of the messages. So you could use the blue notepad browse file and you could go to the log. So here it is right here, the messages, there's a CSV file, and you could drill down with the XY coordinate of each of the messages in their CSV. So this X, this Y, and this is the issue.